Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get started here. Welcome everyone, warm welcome to everyone. Before we begin, this is something that we haven't done before, which is the subject of climate change. We've done a lot of public forums over the years, but not on this topic and subject. Before we begin, let me invite the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Ake Tangsupvattana, to provide some welcome remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Let me warmly welcome you to ICES Public Forum on Climate Change, Imperatives and Impediments, Regional Responses and Local Relations. Normally, ICES Thailand holds conferences and forums on geopolitics and geoeconomics as well as comparative politics with reference to ASEAN, the major powers, and Thailand. The mission of ICES Thailand is to serve as a bridge between Thailand and the outside world. But today, we are going to do something different. We are looking inward and outward and trying to merge the truth on climate issues. Today, we are not looking at relations among states or among Thai political actors, but relations between humankind, states, society, and nature, and the environment in the context of Thailand and its regional neighborhood. Climate change has become the forefront among the most pressing challenges of our time. From melting glaciers and rising sea levels to extreme weather patterns, the international community across the globe is in trouble from fast deteriorating natural conditions around us. Collective global responses such as the Paris Agreement or the United Nations Framework of Convention on Climate Change have been unable to keep up with the flow of daily bad news. Popular pressures from below to combat climate change has come from individuals and organizations intent to taking government to task, resulting in recent demonstrations worldwide. Climate change also has become a non-traditional security threat for many countries, manifesting in more frequent natural disasters, for example. I would like to add that our public forum today is timely, maybe not because of today Bangkok is colder, but because of the political leaders and climate activists are meeting in Spain for the COP25 ahead of COP26 in Glasgow next year. Climate change and the imperative for all countries to cut emissions are now considered as a global emergency in need of immediate action. Our forum here is intended to raise local awareness and publicize climate change issues. You can see that our other forums on geopolitics have attracted more audience, but never mind. It is more important to us to touch and spotlight climate change and drum up greater audience participation later. In this vein, I would like to add that ICES Thailand's future public forums also will become more climate conscious by minimizing plastic use and other efforts that can make our own contribution towards saving, preserving, and restoring our climate as much as we can. We are grateful to the Embassy of the Kingdom of Morocco, a country keen on tackling climate issues, for co-hosting and sponsoring this event. Let me now thank to expert lineup of speakers for their time and insights, starting with His Excellency Mr. Abdeliah El Housni, the ambassador to the Kingdom of Thailand, the Embassy of the Kingdom of Morocco, Dr. Paitun Mahapanaporn, Deputy Director General ASEAN Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Niall O'Conner, Director of ASEAN Stockholm Environmental Institute, Thailand, and Mr. Scott Chang, Asia Pacific Director, Ford Motor Company Foundation, and co-founder of the FREC, Bangkok, Thailand, and Ms. Nanticha Ocharoenchai, environmental writer and climate activist, the founder of the Climate Strike Thailand. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and may I return the floor to Ajahn Thitinan.
Dear Dean, eminent speakers, excellencies, distinguished guests, good morning everyone. Welcome. Thank you for showing interest in joining us and for your interest in this very challenging issue, which coincides with the kicking of COP 2025 in Madrid. Many of you are wondering, especially some of my friends from the diplomatic corps, they are here, are wondering why Morocco is co-organizing this public forum along with the ICIS on the climate change. So mainly there are three reasons. One is general. Climate change is affecting the whole globe and putting in danger all the ecosystem and the mankind. Second one is continental and regional. Morocco is fully engaged in the African continent to put in place the basic of sustainable development. The third one is Morocco and the ASEAN partnership. Morocco is fully convinced that we have to do more than just raise awareness about climate change, as demonstrated by the Voice of Morocco at the highest level in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and at the same time by the organization of COP7 in 2001, because we say that Kyoto Protocol was born in Marrakesh, but was adopted in Kyoto. And in November 2016, Morocco organized the COP22 in Marrakesh. Further, Morocco's political efforts are openly climate compatible and demonstrate that environmental policies are attuned to economic growth and eradication of poverty. To give you a glimpse of the Moroccans' effort in tackling climate change, Morocco was ranked second in the Climate Change Performance Index 2018 that you can see on the chart from the United Nations Environmental Programme. This performance is the result of the Moroccans' leadership in combating climate change, reflected through its clear environmental policy, energy subsidy, reforms, and commitment to pollution management, as you can see in slide 6 and 7. Aware that negligence in tackling the effects of climate change will lead dire consequences, threatening the security and stability, Morocco is currently deeply involved in Africa in addressing the challenge of the climate change. While many of you are inquiring about the outcome of this public forum, the first one, as Dr. Thitinan said, I would say that this forum is intended to go beyond talking about the environment problems. From our part, we sincerely hope through this forum to find gateways to the Moroccan-ASEAN cooperation in combating climate change within the framework of South-South cooperation. Indeed, Morocco and ASEAN countries are increasingly vulnerable to the effect of climate change, including sea level rise, storm surge, and coastal flooding. This vulnerability and the impact are a major concern to Morocco and to the Southeast Asian country as well. I would seize this opportunity to express and reiterate my willingness, or the willingness of my country, the Kingdom of Morocco, to work with all ASEAN countries members in dealing with the issue of climate change. In combating climate change, we need to promote and ensure an integrated and holistic approach. Collaboration and networking among countries and other stakeholders is therefore crucial. Equally important to the need for effective partnership between all the private sector on one hand and the governments. It means for the parliaments too, on the other hand, to facilitate partnership and collaboration. I'm convinced that Morocco and ASEAN member countries will have tremendous opportunities to explore and achieve many concrete results and interventions. These results will not be achieved without the engagement of the youth in tackling the current challenges. I do believe that youth must play a crucial role in combating climate change. Indeed, they are the driving force to help transforming our societies toward low carbon and climate resilient future. Before I cede the floor, I would like to thank Chulalongkorn University, particularly Dr. Titinan and his team, for their collaboration with the Embassy of the Kingdom of Morocco. Also, I wish full success to my friend. He's not here, Dr. Suriya, because he got with hectic agenda. I wish him to a bright future in his new challenging mission. I wish everyone very productive. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I'll just say a little bit about them one by one. First, I want to invite Niall O'Conner to give us a bit of a background, set the scene a little bit. Mr. O'Conner is Irish, but more important than that, he's our neighbor. I've learned that he actually is a director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI. He's been working on climate issues, environment, sustainability for all of his career through Africa, many places in the world, including the Worldwide Fund. He's our neighbor. He rents, the SEI rents a floor within our faculty. So I think the dean is here, Niall. He won't be raising the rent anytime soon. So the floor is yours to perhaps tell us a little bit, set the scene, and give us some background with figures and data about climate change, sustainability, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors. Pleasure that you're here as well. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a little bit worried I might not get through everything I say, or everything I wanted to say here, but I'm also a little bit concerned that, given the real challenge that we have from climate change, this isn't seen as one of those major turnouts for everybody. This is part of the problem. Do we really understand what the impacts of climate change are going to be like, and are we taking it serious enough? So hopefully during the course of the next half an hour, maybe you'll begin to see why we should take this far more seriously, and that we should start to act together as a community. Just first, cities are a big part of this, and I just wanted to say some quick facts. Over 400 climate records have been broken so far this year in over 30 cities. France hit a record of 46 degrees in Paris. We can see real impacts happening there. Over 15,000 people in Paris died as a result of heat waves in cities. There's critical issues that are happening. I also read a report recently, and I just had a discussion with somebody about, are we overestimating the climate impacts? Are we kind of stating it just to get some news? But there's a lot of scientists who are saying that they're underestimating the impacts of climate change. And they did so to try and not scare people. But the reality is it could be far worse than we predict, and it's happening far quicker than we thought. And when it comes to economies, the cost of this to economies is astronomical. One Hurricane Harvey in Houston caused $125 billion worth of damage. This is going to have huge impacts across the world. In Thailand, I know there was the flooding in 2011 that cost $45 billion. There's been many others. And all these sums are going to add up, and they're going to take back from what countries are investing in sustainability. So we've got to be very careful. And just while I was kind of putting together this presentation, I was talking to my wife, and I said, I'm reading a horror story. And she goes, oh, it sounds like a nice book. What is it? And I said, it's the IPCC report. And the reality is, it's frightening. The figures are frightening. So I'm going to try and take you through some of those to try and highlight this. So bear with me as I talk through some of the slides here. It's clear at the moment that we're not likely to reach the Paris Climate Agreement target of 1.5 degrees. You'll see the projected climates these are the actual temperatures over the last kind of, let's say, 100 years or near enough. It's continuously going up at approximately 0.2 centigrade every decade. Whilst we're going above 1.5 degrees as a global climate temperature, about 40% of the human population live in areas where it goes beyond that, because that's 1.5 as an average, but there's areas that goes up to 2 and 3 degrees already. These are clear impacts. We can see that this is having huge impacts across many areas in the climate system itself, whether that's going to be increasing both land and ocean temperatures, and I'll show you slides on that, frequent heat waves on land and in ocean, which has huge impacts, and then the frequency of the intensity and the heavy rain precipitation, which is causing huge impacts for many, many people. So I'm going to just try and show some facts and figures, but don't get frightened by them, please. Here we can see that global mean surface temperature is on the increase, and all these charts are from 1950 up to 2100. And projections are quite frightening sometimes, where you're looking at the 4 or 5 degrees centigrade increase in temperature on the globe, meaning that in some parts it'll be hotter, some parts it'll be cooler. The second one is looking at sea surface temperature. That has huge impacts on fisheries, on coral reefs. And when you link that with pH, that's increasing acidity. We're seeing that we're destroying the basic natural resources of the planet that we are totally reliant upon. And I think when we look at issues like this, we have to understand the ethical considerations of them. We have to look at the principles of gender and social equality so that we are supporting everybody, because unfortunately, as we continue to warm up, it's going to disproportionately affect the poor and the vulnerable communities. And this is maybe one of the reasons why some of the countries aren't getting behind the facts and figures, aren't getting behind the speed of which change is necessary. And I think if we look at all of these impacts, and I'll show some further charts that highlight key issues that we should be kind of nervous about. These are areas around ice melting, the Greenland ice melting over the next couple of years, also with the Antarctic and the glaciers in the mountains. Combine these together, and as we're beginning to reach tipping points in terms of their melting, we're looking at a potential sea level rise of up to 70 meters. These figures kind of frighten people, but these are over maybe 200, 300 years. But we have an opportunity today to try and reverse a lot of that if we come together and work together. We also see the permafrost is beginning to thaw out, and so 90% of the permafrost across the northern hemisphere is beginning to defrost. That has huge amounts of methane gas now, which is going to push kind of the tipping points and the cycle of emissions even further. We also see that the Gulf Stream, which for Ireland is critically important, it protects our weather and our climate, but that has slowed down by 15% because of the dilution of salt in the oceans with the melting glaciers. If that turns, if that changes, it has huge implications to climate across all of Western Europe. Are we beginning to see the big picture that's out there in front of us? And I say there is no single answer to all of this. We need to work together with multiple partners, multiple people to try and solve the problem. But it's very clear, looking at the diagrams here, that with the emissions that as currently we are emitting, and with the Paris Agreement commitments that we've currently made, that global warming is expected to pass the 1.5, and not very far from today. And if we look at the pledges that we've made in terms of our NDCs, we're looking at a +3 degree world in the next 20, 30 years. These are the facts and figures. Not everybody listens to science, but I think everybody should be aware of what's actually happening. And I think a lot of these pathways, when the scientists are doing their models and scenarios, they also integrate the ideas of carbon sequestration, whether through new innovations, new technologies. So they've been integrated into these models, and still we're seeing very high levels of emissions. But for us to really try and survive and make sure we keep it within kind of livable conditions in terms of 1.5 degrees centigrade, we have to get to net zero CO2 emissions within 15 years. And that's not a very long time, as I'll show you now in a few minutes. So basically just saying, looking at Southeast Asia, which these figures are showing now, the various pathways are showing anywhere between a 1 and a 5 degree increase in climate. This is what's going to impact on this part of the world. And that's important because I think somebody mentioned to me the other day that if you look at Bangkok in the 1970s, they talked about 20 days a year being over 35 degrees. Recently we're having 120 days over 35 degrees. So we're beginning to see both the impact of climate change, but also the impact of urbanization, which are creating kind of these heat waves and island heat waves that are causing lots of problems. But we can see that we're not really on target. If you look at the cost of trying to limit to 1.5 degrees, we look at, it's going to cost substantial amounts of money, and nobody can put a specific figure. But if we let it go to 2 degrees, which is highly likely, it's going to cost us 3 to 4 times the amount to try and bring it back. So we have an opportunity to be cost efficient by looking at 1.5 degree and keeping our facts and figures towards that. We also then see sea level rise. Again, looking at the current projections and not integrating the current kind of loop that is happening towards the figures around the glaciers, we're looking at sea level rise of up to 1 meter in this region. And that has huge implications because a lot of the cities around here are low-lying cities, and there have been anywhere projections up to 60, 70 million people that would be, may have to relocate. But as sea level rise goes beyond 1 meter, you're looking up to maybe 700 million people having to relocate. These, again, are kind of the types of information that people need to be aware about to understand the potential impacts of climate change. And we say potential because we don't know exact, but at the same time, the facts and figures are leading in a very kind of clear pathway that we need to think through. And furthermore, beyond the kind of traditional kind of thinking of climate change and the way that we look at the sea level rise and the way that we see oceans and so forth, there is another area that not a lot of people are focusing on. These are the transboundary kind of climate impact ways. These are areas that we have to integrate into our thinking and into our planning and into supporting kind of solutions. So we have the biophysical, which is really around river basins, and a lot of these are transboundary basins such as the Mekong. It doesn't just affect Thailand, it affects 4, 5, 6 countries, and we have to work around those scales. Financial pathways are also important in terms of businesses that are investing overseas. They're going to stop putting funds into some countries that have higher risks. Insurance companies are going to stop investing in countries where there's higher risk from disasters, and that will have an impact on the country's economy as a result of climate change. People pathways, as we see the climate is impacting more and more on vulnerable communities, on agriculture, we may see more migration. How are we going to control that? Then obviously trade pathways. One clear example I think came from Thailand and from India over the last number of years, where with increased kind of droughts, national countries are putting in policies to protect their food production, which is a fair thing to do. Here in particular, to reduce the exportation of rice to make sure there was enough rice in Thailand. That's a natural kind of approach to take. However, as it had been an exporting country for many years, Senegal, who imported from Thailand, suddenly had a 400% increase in the cost of rice and had rioting on the streets because they couldn't import from Thailand or from India. So the impacts of trade based on climate change in one country have massive impacts on other countries. And do we understand these? Are we integrating those into our planning? So to try and take it into a little bit of a kind of close to home, this is Bangkok in 2011. This is the flooding that we saw in 2011. We all remember the damage that it caused, the impacts not just to vulnerable and poor communities here, but to the international trade itself. The supply chains of many products were hampered for 6 months to 12 months. I think Toyota cars couldn't produce cars for a long time as a result of this. This is one extreme case, no doubt. These were the most recent projections up until earlier this year of what it will be like in 2050 on an annual flood levels in Bangkok. So you can see there's quite a huge area, maybe not as much as what was flooded in the 2011, but this was the projected level. With reviews of the satellite imagery, with reviews of the scenario plannings, this is now the new projection for 2050. So you can see the reality. It's going to hit Bangkok hard, and it's going to hit Ho Chi Minh City, Yangon City, Shanghai, many other cities, Mumbai, similarly with this approach. And if we're not projecting what sort of understanding of climate change, if we're not integrating that into our planning and into our future development plans, we could be very much in difficulty. So I still say the choice is ours. We have opportunities to work on this. And we want to try and make sure that we support communities to do so, or support governments to do so. Global urban areas are going to be the key way of tackling this. We're predicting that by 2030 we're going to triple the amount of global urban areas there are on the planet. With everybody moving towards cities, we expect to get up to about 70 to 80% of people living in urban areas. This is going to be the future that we have to address. This is Manhattan. What they're saying is that there's an area the size of Manhattan being built every day. That's just astronomical. But with cities, they consume a lot, they emit a lot. So these are the big challenges we have to face. And we have to make sure that we work on environmental sustainability at the city level, ensuring that there's economic security and human well-being in the city level, ensuring equity and inclusion across people there, and then developing appropriate policies to make sure that all of this is being integrated and supporting towards long-term sustainable development. Now, the reason why I kind of hone in on cities is this is what New York is predicted to be like in the future as well. So it kind of makes it more real when you see this. It's not trying to scaremonger. These are the predictions with climate increases or with sea level rise as a result of climate. And this is going to happen, as I said, around the world. Unfortunately, in Asia, we have another problem. And this is because of climate conditions and changing climate, we see that there are a lot more disasters happening throughout Southeast Asia over the last kind of 20, 30 years. And these are mainly meteorological, hydrological, and climatological events. The geophysical remains stable, there are earthquakes and so forth, but we see a big increase in the impact of these disasters. And again, they tend to hit the more vulnerable communities. They tend to cause huge amounts of destruction and impacts on the economy that we have to then integrate into how we then develop things moving forward. And these extreme events, they impact on human health, on our security, on our livelihoods, and particularly on those poor and vulnerable communities. And we have to make sure that that is part of our planning and part of our thinking moving forward. So, I talk about megacities, and while people think we're talking about climate change, as I said, I think cities are going to be the future in terms of how we solve the issues around climate change. Because if we can solve it in cities, and here we have the megacities of the 1950s, and now we have the megacities of 2015. And out of the megacities, of which I think there's 37 globally, these are over 20 million populations, 23 of them are in Asia. So a lot of the problems we're going to address are going to have to be addressed here in Asia. We also look at building these cities is going to be astronomical, and we're estimating anywhere up to $120 billion per year up to 2030 that's going to be invested in building these cities. Now, at the moment, we're building with cement, we're building on fossil fuel approaches, so we're locking ourselves into future climate change problems by continuing to build in this particular way. So as I said, this is one of the reasons why we want to try and turn it around and focus on cities. And it was an interesting fact, we showed New York there as well. New York's economy is bigger than South Korea's. So if we can solve some of the city's problems, we can actually start to address some of the global problems that we're working on. And I think it was said recently that sustainable development over the next kind of several decades will largely be a story of sustainable urban development. And this is the approach that we want to try and move going forward. So we want to look at investing in sustainable infrastructure, and it's the growth story of the future. How are we going to do that? I think what we need to be clear on as well is that the decisions that we're making in the next few years, anywhere between 2 and 5 years, they're going to have massive economic impacts, and they're going to lock us into this carbon emissions that we're talking about. We see that to date so far people are pushing gross domestic production, pushing growth in every city and every town, every country that they have, but the problem with that is that it also increases carbon emissions at the same time. So as we're trying to push and say that we need to have economic growth, we're equally causing more problems when it comes to climate. And this is largely around cities as well. So we need to make sure that we focus on cities to be more compact, more connected, more sustainable, more productive, but socially inclusive and resilient, so that we all have a better quality of life whilst we're addressing some of the climate impacts. So if we don't change this approach to GDP, we're going to see a major problem. And sadly across many parts of the world, but I show the figures for Asia, we can see that we're not yet addressing the challenges in the way that we should. These are projections for a sevenfold increase in energy demands since 1970 across Southeast Asia. The blue lines is what we currently had in 2014-15, and the yellow is where we're going towards. And we can see that we're increasing dramatically the need for fossil fuel-based energy in the region. Where this is coming from, sadly, coal, oil and gas is the majority of this again. I think the projection is to look at a 61% increase in CO2 emissions across Asia, across the ASEAN region, I should say, in the next kind of 5 to 10 years. So clearly we're not going in the right direction. We're going backwards. And that's despite the fact that we know that there are alternatives, such as upscaling renewables. We know many places have developed dams and are putting in, more and more dams, but there are some problems with that too. It is renewable energy, and it is in many cases clean energy, but if they're not managed properly, we can see in the Mekong at the moment it's at its lowest level in 100 years. And I saw a report yesterday saying that the Mekong is flowing blue. It's got blue waters. It never had blue waters because it carries such sedimentation. And with those sedimentations stopping, we're going to see the impacts on the deltas and the impacts on the rice growing capabilities. So unless we can work together to try and build free-flowing rivers, maybe that the dams are not the most suitable solution, but they are one that can be useful in many contexts. We also see a massive increase in putting in solar power. And we know that Thailand is kind of spearheading a lot of that in the region itself, and I think the idea is to put in the world's largest floating solar farms on many of its reservoirs at the moment, which is fantastic. And I think if we can keep Thailand pioneering in this way and keep them developing and pushing forward, it could help inspire many other countries to do the same. So we're very keen to see how this success is. And when you see people starting to look at renewables, this is why. It's very clear that the cost of renewables has come down dramatically over the last number of years. It is now equal to, and many times beats, fossil fuels. So we know we have an alternative. We know we have the price range that we can work within. So why aren't we doing it? Well, there's a political economy around fossil fuels. People are embedded into fossil fuel development and financing. And we have to break that. We have to change that approach. And just recently, I think in November, the European Investment Bank did just that. And they said they're going to stop lending to coal, oil and gas. This is a change that we need to see happening across the globe. Unfortunately, that's not likely to happen just now, but if we don't really invest in renewable energies, we're going to see a continuous upsurge in emissions. And not to frighten anybody, but here's the facts. We have 5 years of the current emission levels that we have today. In 5 years' time, we have guaranteed to reach 1.5 degrees centigrade increase. We have 25 years to see, can we keep it below 2 degrees centigrade? These are the facts based on our current levels of emissions. We'd love to say that we're getting a long way towards achieving that, but we're not. And as of last week, we just produced a new report looking at production gap. And it's very clear here that governments are continuing to plan to consume more fossil fuels. Here, this chart is showing that by, I think by 2030, the governments plan to produce more than 50% more on fossil fuels than would keep us within the 2 degree centigrade pathway, and 120% more on the 1.5 degree pathway. So while governments are sitting in COP now trying to discuss about their climate deals, other ministries are sitting outside talking about their production of oil and gas and coal. And it's quite clear that we're going further and further away from where we need to be to hit our targets. This is why this event is so important. We need to make sure people understand the reality. And if we can start to turn this around, these 3 to 4 degree pathways are very clear. We're going to hit them. Also, just put this up here just to show people a lot of discussions over the last few months about how China is the worst polluter of all, it's putting out there. And yes, in terms of actual tonnage, it is. But it's also coming from a least developed to a very developed country. But when you turn it into per capita, it's very different. So we have to actually know who are the real polluters behind this, and not just kind of scaremonger with facts and figures. Everybody can put out the right figures and sell them in any particular way they want. But the reality is there are other countries who are, per capita, bigger emitters. We need to work with those countries. And if you can see a small little boat on the bottom of the chart on your, be on your left, I think, or your right, sorry. This is just the global trade in kind of commodities. And they're also one of the highest emitters. How do we address shipping industry? Itself is bigger than some major countries. So we have to look about how we work towards bringing everybody together to think about this, not just having everybody arguing over COP25 and climate agreements while somebody else is doing something completely different around fossil fuels. So we have developed a tool within SEI called the SDG Interaction Tool, and the idea behind this is to try and bring the key decision makers in government together to work around a simple metric scoring around the SDGs. You can break this down into either working on the 17 SDGs, which is big and complex, or you can target a number of individual SDGs or a combination. But the idea is to sit down working with your Ministry of Mines, your Ministry of Oil and Gas, your Ministry of Environment, your Finance Ministry, your Health Ministry, get people to talk about this and see where the interactions between SDGs are. What is positive, what is negative? It helps you to prioritise what you should invest in, and it helps you to think through the scenarios from different perspectives. And hopefully then from a national point of view, you can come up with a plan that is both looking at sustainable development, but also supporting economic growth. And it is important that we look at it this way, because it is possible to decouple kind of development and your GDP aspirations from fossil fuel dependency. And Sweden in many cases has done it. Others are beginning to do the same. So if we can help prioritise the targets, show the interactions and the positive synergies between targets, and maybe sometimes the trade-offs we're going to have to make between targets, we can start setting the right trajectory towards SDG delivery. We can also link this into the NDCs that are being developed. So, for example, energy here under some countries, NDC targets, which have to be updated next year, and we hope they get stronger, because currently they're not good enough, nor are we likely to reach them even at that point. But energy links into a number of different SDGs. And are we understanding the complexity of how we're setting up all these global deals that we want everybody to work with, and how we can make them work by creating the synergies between the institutions, creating the capacity of those institutions to understand where energy can impact on SDGs, where energy can impact on health, where it can impact on areas of pollution, etc., and how we integrate that into all of our planning. And this would help us deliver on the SDGs. But again, unfortunately, and I'm not a doomsayer by any means, but unfortunately in the Asia and Pacific region, we're not reaching our targets for SDGs either. We can see that the 2018 line is where we should have been by now. And many of them are nowhere near the targets, and some of them are falling backwards. Responsible consumption and production is one of them, and that is around maybe a lot of issues around energy as well. So we can see we have a lot of work to do over the next number of years, and we want to try and encourage everybody to get behind that. So that is the arena in which we are currently, and I'll speed up a little bit now, but we have major development ongoing with major financial investments into this, which is not green financing. Major consumption of energy, over kind of consumption and production and waste, and all of this needs to somehow change. But we're not seeing the change yet. We know pollution is a major issue in many countries in Southeast Asia. A lot of it is caused by emissions, carbon emissions from energy production. The implications for health are huge. 4.2 million people are dying a year as a result of breathing issues, sorry. And we're not addressing that. And pollution in general is causing 9 million deaths a year, which is 3 times TB, HIV, AIDS, and malaria. Yet, does it get the voice it should have? Not yet. So we need to look at why carbon emissions and the type of approach we're taking to climate change has implications elsewhere that we have to address. We also want to just look quickly at urban areas and heat waves. This is something that is kind of a silent killer, and people are not discussing it. We know there are ways to design cities better and make sure that people can live within it, but we know that urban heat areas are increasing. And if you look across the aging society in Asia, this is going to be a major problem. If you take on board a growing older community, if they do not have proper access to cool areas, and what we're doing now with increasing temperatures is increasing our air conditioning, which is increasing CO2 emissions, the problem continues. We also see a double kind of whammy here. The double problem here is that as we see the rising temperature, and as we see more and more extreme events happening, as we see in previous charts, the kind of hospital services won't be able to cope with this. And this is one of the issues that happened in Paris when so many people lost their lives as a result of extreme climates. They couldn't cope with this. And this is going to continue within the Asian region over the next while, unless we start to address these issues. So, I'm not trying to scare everybody. I'm kind of an optimist by nature, so I think there are ways that we can turn this around. But I think if we don't understand it first and don't understand the reality that we're facing, we're not going to make those decisions. The Asian region has got 6 of the highest ranked risk countries in the world are within the Asian region. Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam, for example, are getting more and more natural disasters than before, and they're impacting on the availability of water to cropping industries, to household industries, or households, and to industry itself. So we need to address this. And I think also if we're looking at holding back to 1.5 degrees, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degree warming would mean a 50% increase in the number of people who are have lack of access to safe water supplies. So we're putting a lot of people in jeopardy by allowing ourselves to go past 1.5 degrees. We're not going to have the access we need. And if we go to beyond 2 and 3 degrees, that gets more difficult. So again, we need to work to support the vulnerable communities in this transition. I said briefly we have ongoing issues with the Mekong, so I won't go into that as well. It's the lowest in 100 years. But this brings about then the issue of climate change and migration. And it's a factor we're going to have to deal with. As the climate continues to give more and more droughts and makes food security a problem, it gives more and more floods, which is causing difficulties for a lot of people. People will begin to move. Maybe not permanently, maybe temporarily, but they will begin to move, and we have to look at this. There are many kind of rapid events, such as the extreme weather events, but there's also the slow onset, which is the sea level rise, which is going to impact on huge amounts of areas. So we've got to work around understanding the kind of impacts of climate change on communities like this. There is one example I've seen in Fiji, which is rather strange, that Kiribati government came over and bought an old farm on Fiji so that it could relocate its entire population into Fiji. That's the future they're looking at. Maybe not as extreme as some places here, but you will begin to see when sea level rises around the deltas, what are people going to do? But kind of the whole area of migration is a bit more complex, and obviously it's very difficult to put a specific figure on climate migrants because you're looking at a number of different political issues, economic issues, cultural and social issues. But it's quite clear that there is going to be an increase in climate migration. Many people have said that the Syrian conflict was not necessarily it was more likely to be an issue over access to water and environmental issues than many other issues. If things like this can happen, what's going to happen when this starts to hit everybody in particular regions across Africa and in some parts of Asia? We've got to really think through this and put plans in place to support longer term trends. In agriculture, we're also going to see major problems hit us. We see a lot of kind of what we call now rural transitions. The feminization of agriculture. A lot of men are moving out of agriculture and into cities to build these cities, causing climate issues, meaning that there's not a lot of capacity back on the land, and we're going to see with that and changing climates, the cropping systems are going to change. When to plant will change. Are people trained to try and continue to produce, or will we see more vulnerable issues? These are areas we have to try and focus on, and specifically the impacts of climate are going to hit around water and salinity, and these are happening along all the deltas. Water scarcity in many areas, the dry zones, whether in ASEAN here in northern Thailand or in the dry zones of Myanmar. Changes in the seasons and patterns of rainfall. So will people know when to plant? Will the rains be consistent? Will this impact on future food security? And pest and disease breakout. So there's a lot of things happening. So we have to adapt to climate change. And many of the things we can try and do is look at changing the crops and the crops sequences. But have we done enough research to know what they're going to be? And have we projected what we need to do in 10, 20, 30 years and plan for that? There's going to be kind of increased competition over land, as we're now looking at bioeconomies and looking at fuels. How do we stop that? So we're going to have to start transitioning away from the traditional type of agriculture, looking at how we can integrate climate adaptation into that. But as I said, here's the Mekong Delta in 50 years. So we can see that it's going to have massive impacts on cities, on food production systems, and on people, and we're going to have to plan that into it. I'll quickly try and go through the final couple of slides. We talk about it being impossible. It's not impossible. There certainly is ways that we can work around this, but it is going to take a lot of financing, and I think climate financing is going to be the biggest thing we have to work on over the next 5 to 10 years. And we're looking at, in ASEAN region, up to $8 trillion a year being invested into infrastructure. How do we make that green? And that's going to be a tremendous opportunity to drive things and change things. We've worked around the new climate economy and given many indications in this report of how we can try and bring about green financing and support transition away from what many people call stranded assets, investing in billions of dollars worth of power plants that will no longer be viable in the future, or in infrastructure that are no longer viable. We have to support that transition. And I'll just finish up quickly with 2 or 3 kind of key things. One is the financial systems. We need to deliver at scale, and the quality of investment needs to be green and supported for small to medium enterprises as well as large organizations. We need to strengthen policy frameworks and institutional capacities to make sure that we are supporting institutions to make the right decisions. Within SEI, we have many tools to support that, but I'm not really going to go into the details now because I'm running over my time. But we want to focus on you guys as the change makers. What are you going to do to try and change this? If we're sitting here today and we're saying that it's a lower turnout because it's not the usual, are people really aware of and really taking climate change seriously enough to want to sit down in something like this and to want to start changing? I hope you do. We want to work together with you to make that happen. And if we do that, I think we have a historic opportunity to look at inclusive economic growth, to look at eliminating poverty at the same time, and to reducing climate change risks. So I will leave it at that. The challenge is urgent, and thank you for your time.
For me, on climate, learning curve is very steep. So, I've read a lot about the South China Sea, the artificial islands, the Mekong dams, but when it comes to climate, it seems like there's something new to learn all the time. It's an ultimate kind of collective action problem, right? It's the ultimate one. A lot of incentives to cheat, there's a lot of free riders. People are causing problems without incentive to provide solutions. You also mentioned a lot about we this and we that. And that's, I think, that's something that I want to work on now for the rest of the session. There was one of your slides had a table of cities, countries most affected by rising sea, water resources most affected in these countries by climate change. And the top country most severely affected is Honduras. But in that table, there are 4 ASEAN countries, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, which is really something. And also Bangladesh and Pakistan. So in fact, 6 countries right around here that the water resources will be severely affected. And we can see that, Thailand is a good case study because we live here. So I want to move now to an ASEAN perspective. I mean, climate change, we can talk a long time, but the solutions, ways forward have to come from individuals, but also companies, private sector, but also national governments, but also regional responses, and ultimately international. But regional, today we had the Director General of the ASEAN Department, Dr. Suriya, but he has been called into a meeting on short notice. But in his place, we have the Deputy Director General, Paitun Mahapanapon, Dr. Paitun Mahapanapon. So Dr. Paitun, DG Suriya also has a PhD. Dr. Paitun has a PhD from the Australian National University. And he has worked on ASEAN issues. Thailand has been a chair of ASEAN in 2019. And under the Thai chairmanship, I think ASEAN has made some headway on sustainability, climate change. So perhaps you can share with us a little bit at the regional level, regional response to climate change. Dr. Paitun.
Thank you very much, First of all, I would like to thank Chulalongkorn University to bring this climate issue to our attention. I'm glad whether it is the first ever conference that Chulalongkorn has hosted, that it is such a good milestone for our cooperation in this of common concern and issues. I'll provide you with some overview of the situation of the climate change in the ASEAN region. So for sure that the people all over the world are facing with severely multiple effects from the climate change, and Southeast Asia is no exception, as it is one of the most at-risk regions in the world to the impact of the climate change. And it is that a major concern to ASEAN. In the past several decades, there were an increasing number of catastrophic national disasters in the region, whether it be like storms, cyclones, floods and droughts, which can clearly be seen in Vietnam, Myanmar or Thailand. This year Thailand have faced with the severe floods in the northeastern part of the country, and while I'm talking here, the people in the northern part of Thailand are facing with the problem of drought. I'll provide you some statistics from the Global Climate Risk Index, or CRI, in 2019, developed by German Watch. Indicated that half of the ASEAN member states are ranked among top 20 countries that were most affected by climate change. from the years 1998 to 2017. There are Myanmar as the third, the Philippines as the fifth, Vietnam as the ninth, and Thailand as the 13th, and Cambodia as the 19th. And in addition, the ADB also reviewed that the mean temperature in the region increased by 0.1 to 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade between 1951 to 2000. And the sea level have risen 1 to 3 millimeters per year. And the same study projects 4.8 degrees Celsius rise in mean annual temperature and 70 centimeters rise in mean sea level by the year 2100 in Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And this is why ASEAN member states, even though we are not the source of the significant emission of greenhouse gases, have taken actions to address climate change through various environmental, economic, and social activities over the years. At the regional level, we have implemented measures under the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Blueprint 2015 with an aspiration to move forward the community to sustainable climate in order to realize a resilient community, such as strengthening efforts of government and private sectors and community in reducing greenhouse gases emission and so on. At the global level, ASEAN strongly support global efforts in addressing climate change under the UNFCCC, and I'm glad to inform you that all ASEAN members states have ratified the Paris Agreement and communicated their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which emphasize our commitments towards the climate change adaptation and mitigation. The implementation mechanism within ASEAN we also have, which is ASEAN Working Group on the Climate Change, or AWGCC, which is under the supervision of ASEAN senior officials of the environment, or what we call ASEAN, and ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on the Environment, or MME. The national focal point of this in Thailand is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. The working group will not only create projects, but also seek collaboration with external partners to ensure that ASEAN member states are capable to tackle with multiple effects from the climate change. And ASEAN roles in addressing the climate change in the global community, we can see, every year, ASEAN leaders adopt the joint statements on climate change to reiterate ASEAN common position and aspiration towards the global solution to the climate change problem. We have now 10 ASEAN joint statements, which were and will be delivered at the conference of the parties under UNFCCC, or COP. And last year, Singapore hosted, as the ASEAN chair last year, hosted a special ministerial meeting on climate action, which is the first ever, like the first time that we have the conference here, but it is such a good step for us to bring this to attention for everyone. And as for Thailand, as the chair of ASEAN this year, under the theme of advancing partnership for sustainability, we aspire to create the community that is people-centered, leaves no one behind, looks to the future and promote sustainability in all dimensions, whether it be political, economic, or social, cultural, and as well as the environmental issues. So that's why the climate change and environmental conservations are our top priority agenda for this year. Do you know how many meetings that we hosted this year during Thailand's chairmanship? There were more than 270 meetings we hosted this year. And all the meetings we are convened, we try to make it under the concept of green meetings. So we are committed to making the meeting as environmentally friendly as much as possible by minimizing the negative environmental impact which may incur from the meetings. We need to showcase our strong aspiration and commitment to be a model of all ASEAN member states to implement this concept so that we can reduce the use of paper and the pollution that might affect the greenhouse gas emission and plastic use to promote the ideology of circular economy. This would help our aspiration to fulfill our sustainability goals. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been working with our partners on green meetings with, for example, SCG. The SCG will provide the recycled paper for all the meetings where possible. And PTTCG contributes souvenirs, the meeting supply made from recycled plastic waste, or what we call the upcycling. I'll show you, luckily I've got something. So this is some of the souvenir we've been given to the participants. So it is from trash to treasure. The materials of fabrics recycled from 36 used plastic shopping bags and then knitted by craft people of Rayong province. Lining the backing fabrics are recycled from denim industry. So this is sponsored by the PTTGC. We also try to reduce the use of plastic bags, and then also, as Ajahn Titinan mentioned, that he's glad that this time we have glass water rather than plastic water. In all ASEAN meetings also, we also use glass rather than plastic bottle. And all the food and beverage packages are made from recycled and biodegradable materials. We also enhance sustainability in all dimensions, particularly through the establishment of ASEAN centers in Thailand. One of them is the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, which was launched at the 35th ASEAN Summit in November in Thailand. Operating within the center of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, the center has two main objectives. First is to promote research and capacity building on sustainable development. Second is to serve as a platform for policy dialogue for ASEAN member states and also between ASEAN and its external partner. As the ambassador of Morocco has mentioned, that Morocco has cooperated with ASEAN. Maybe we also encourage the cooperation in the area of the climate change together with this center, because this center also encourages all interested partners to work with them on these issues. Another deliverable under Thailand's ASEAN chairmanship is our preparation for the disasters management. So the satellite warehouse was established in China province to enable ASEAN and ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, or we know as AHA Center, to effectively pursue the rapid mobilization and distribution to the disaster-affected ASEAN member states. In terms of commitments to the international arena, we delivered two main joint statements on climate change. As one at the UN Climate Action Summit on the 23rd September 2019 in New York, and the Thai Prime Minister, as the ASEAN chair, presented key targets that all ASEAN members are committed to being actively involved and implement, whether it be energy transition and land transport. And moreover, ASEAN explains its position that each country cannot solve this problem alone. Therefore, the stronger partnership is needed to overcome this challenge. And at the UNFCCC or COP25, now in Madrid, Thailand will be delivering the joint statement on climate change on the 10th of December. And we call upon the parties of the UNFCCC to enhance their mitigation and adaptation action by implementing NDCs under the Paris Agreement. ASEAN also called upon the developed country parties to provide assistance and support to ASEAN member states and other developing countries for technology development and transfer, scientific research, and capacity building. That these two joint statements ensure ASEAN commitment and support on strong partnership, which would help contribute to the climate action. On the way forward, despite of the mechanism and number of documents on climate change, ASEAN still recognizes the need to enhance its commitment and to come up with concrete implementation of the climate action. We try to encourage one another to intensify their actions at the national level and take advantage of the regional architecture based on ASEAN centrality to call upon international community to address this issue. For me, what is important is that the effective way and efficient way to solve or overcome this challenge is the behavioral change, because I do believe it is the way to solve the problem from the root cause. One thing I wish to emphasize is the engagement of all stakeholders in helping overcome this challenge. That means all government sectors, private sectors, public sectors, and all the people are needed. I had a chance to talk to the CEO of the True, who owned the business of the 7-Eleven convenience shops. Guess what? There are about 11,000 branches all over Thailand of 7-Eleven, the convenience shops, which is ranked number 2 in the world. The first is Japan. Thailand comes second. And each branch, there are 1,185 people use the 7-Eleven. So when you multiply with all the branches, it means each day there are 12 million people using 7-Eleven. And what? They had a campaign to reduce the use of plastic bag to the customers, and with some incentive. For example, they would gain some points or gain some discount, something like that. So it means if it is successful, there would be no use of plastic for 12 million per day. So that would be helpful. And Thailand, the garbage each year, there are about 27 million tons per year. And the plastics, and it's 2 million of them are plastics waste. The problem is, out of 2 million tons of plastic waste, there are only 500,000 tons to be recycled. So, I mean, what I'm trying to highlight is that if we cooperate with all stakeholders, public sectors and also the private sectors, we can help solve and overcome this challenge. So we better start, as Dr. O'Conner mentioned, that it's up to us as well. So our commitment is there, our direction is there. The problem is that we need to translate those into concrete projects and actions, and I think we can help overcome this challenge. Thank you, Kap.
Thank you very much.